All right, you guys. Welcome back to another episode of These People Are Idiots. I'm joined here with my friend again, Cyprian Ivanov.
Hello
And
again.
Cyprian, how are things in DC today?
Quiet. There was a lot of hullabaloo about uh, government workers being fired, and well, yeah, that does upset a lot of people. But one of the most remarkable features is that the protests are so much smaller than they were previously. Uh, you used to get protests of maybe a couple thousand people. Now it's maybe a few hundred. They used to have professionally printed signs. You don't see that anymore. So something dramatic has changed.
Kind of makes you wonder if the protest money's drying up.
I mean, signs are some of the cheapest things, so something is definitely different.
I just have to wonder about that because I know you're talking about it a little bit before. Because it's like the people that I used to go protest with, a lot of us didn't have money for signs. We were wasting it on drugs and alcohol. Had to rely on like donations of people bringing the signs, bringing in the Sharpies. So I'm like, hmm. And a lot of it I know too is like a drop in moral support for sure because I mean even if people do believe that this is some sort of like Nazi takeover, which it certainly isn't, the moral drive isn't there. Granted, there is a whole subject of people really wanting to kill the Jews right now they could probably be focusing their energy on, but it's nice to see a lot of the stupid people shutting the fuck up.
The the bureaucratic warfare is just stepping up, but that tends to be a lot less public than the usual have a mass protest to try to pressure politicians or make it look like it's a popular cause thing.
It's more of a shadow world and the media's dictating what to
Yes.
panic about when. Yeah, NBC is very much just, oh, they're firing the workers. Oh, Nazi salute. Oh, this, oh, that. And it's just like, they're never saying where the money's going. Ever. I've noticed. They don't say $1 trillion was spent here, $1 million was spent here. And then, meanwhile, they had a whole session on it. I'm not sure if it was like the Senate or what, but they were talking about Doge and USAID and all that. And there's this group of like older homosexual men and women who were sitting there and they started chanting about the AIDS funding.
I previously served at the U.S. Agency for International.
PEPFAR saves lives! Restore AIDS funding now! PEPFAR saves lives! Restore AIDS funding now! PEPFAR saves lives! Restore AIDS funding now! PEPFAR saves lives!
Restore AIDS funding now. PEPFAR saves lives. 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 Restore AIDS funding now.
I guess these guys don't watch the news. They didn't realize that PEPFAR was one of the many programs that did prove to be life-saving, so the funding was restored. Somebody better give them a link to, I don't know, maybe Fox News or something like that.
Right before the guy started to speak, and you kind of felt like at first you kind of like angry because you're just like this is so stupid and retarded, but then the guy went on to say he's just like, yeah, no, actually, if they were a little more educated on the issue, they would know that that was deemed as necessary funding and it has since been restored. I don't know, maybe they want to turn on Fox News or something. Because for all Fox News is bullshit, they're at least saying what the numbers are.
And that tends to be a pattern about other things. Uh, a bunch of people were fired at the FAA, but that didn't include air traffic controllers. So after the Black Hawk helicopter crashed into the civilian plane, a bunch of people were claiming, "Oh, Trump is firing the air traffic controllers." No, he's not.
And
They're
also,
just
they acted like it was an overnight thing. Like, oh, I'm going to fire people. And then that just happens to correlate with, admittedly, a start. I was starting to feel suspicious after the third plane crash, and I was literally joking with my husband. I was like, "Watch, there's going to be a plane crash every day right now until the government admits something about the aliens." Not saying this is about aliens. I was just kind of joking about it. But then you turn on the news, and every freaking day, helicopter down, plane down, and just kind of thinking of that video, that Chinese man freaking out on the plane about a month or two back.
This Chinese guy basically freaking out mid-flight, wanting to open the door, and the things he says are very, very strange. Let's just put it that way. And this is in Chinese, so you're not going to understand what he's saying. They're saying, what is he doing? Right? That's what the passengers are saying amongst themselves. Let me just turn this down. What happened? Someone trying to open the door. That's what he's asking. That's the guy. That's the guy screaming that's trying to open the door. They are hollow earth, inhabitants. This is what he literally is saying. He just said that. What in the world, bro? This is the 6th loop. He says he's stuck in a time loop, apparently. And he's living the same day over and over. Please open the door for me. What? Mid-flight. It says, why are you afraid of the police? Police are here. People are here also. He says something about accident is going to happen. There's going to be a plane accident, he says. And this was literally on the 28th, this came out. And then next 3 days, there were several accidents. And I'm going to show you that in a second. So this guy is actually sort of prophetic in what he says. He then talks about that strange thing that happened to Malaysia Airline, MH370, where it disappeared and they never found it. I don't know if you guys ever saw that video. Here's a video, allegedly a video of it, from a satellite.
I'm just watching this and I'm like, what period of history are we in where we just happen to have daily plane crashes? It's a little fucking weird.
Well, it's not exactly daily, but even during the Biden administration, there tended to be about one plane crash every 2 days. Not a serious one, not a fatal one, but the difference between a fatal plane crash and a non-fatal one tends to be luck more than anything else.
Well, one thing I feel like I've noticed too, it's just like, because a lot of it just feels like shadow war tactics to me. Because under the Biden administration, dozens of factories, food plants, ranches burned up, were destroyed, trails going off the train tracks, particularly in rivers. And a lot of that has seemed to stop under the Trump administration, and now we've just kind of moved on to seemingly other regular tragedies. And it just, when I see that, the conspiratorial part of my mind is just like, are we switching up the tactics here? Why? It just feels weird. Just feels really weird. I know a lot of it's dysfunction, but it's just odd.
Well, you have differences in news coverage. There are something like 10,000 train derailment a year at the time of the East Palestine crash. But most of those were minor. Most of the time, nobody got hurt. Most of the time, it didn't become a big environmental catastrophe. Are train derailments still going on? Probably. Probably not on the same scale, but they're almost never in the news until someone notices one and then wonders about other ones. The news that we get from news media sites and often investigative reporters is a tiny fraction of what actually goes on.
Fair.
So a lot of our pattern matching goes, oh, here's something that I noticed. Let me try to find other examples of it. And that's not a random sample of everything that goes on. But also, there's a deeper level of incompetence that went on during the Biden administration and that we're still dealing with. You know that Black Hawk helicopter that crashed into a civilian plane in DC?
Mhm.
Turns out both of the altimeters, the things that tell the pilot how high they're flying, were off.
By like what, 300 feet, right?
I don't remember the exact amount, but those are exactly the sort of things that pilots are supposed to check before flying.
Especially Black Hawk helicopters that are supposed to be carrying politicians and high profile people. Because that's what
And
they were supposed to be doing, weren't they? Like that was just a training
they
mission
were
for that?
training to be able to do that. But also, the ground crew for a Black Hawk helicopter is very highly trained. It's supposed to be very careful, methodical maintenance and repair work. So how the heck did not just one, but two altimeters get messed up? There is something more than just pilot error. It takes sabotage or institutional neglect.
Yeah.
And I'm betting on institutional neglect because we've tended to see standards slip across the military.
I can't imagine that a lot of the military, a lot of these other government positions are much different than working in a restaurant or a retail store. You know, everybody thinks that, if it's not my job, I'm not going to handle it. I'm not getting paid enough. If someone wants to get their work double checked, it's harder than hell. You know, even noticing that here, my husband, where he's working now, it's very similar to a lot of places in Oregon where they just throw you in and they just say, good luck, read the handbook, as if that'll actually teach you anything. And but you get all the DEI training, right? You get all the stupid having to sit there about, oh my God, we had a hilarious little DEI training video at the job that I just did. Have you ever watched the South Park episode where the Cartman keeps being a bully, and in order to stop him, they bring in the little midget?
Principal Victoria, I'm very concerned about the behavior of one of your students.
Yes, we apologize for Eric Cartman's behavior, Mr. Nelson. We feel terrible.
Why? I don't feel terrible. It doesn't bother me at all. Words are like bullets, and I let them pass right through me. I just know that with some one-on-one time together with this Eric Cartman, I have a chance to change the way he thinks.
It might be best if you just let it go, okay?
You don't understand. You see, words are like bullets, and if you take away the gunpowder...
Yeah, we get it, Mr. Nelson.
Very well, Mr. Nelson. Stacy, go ahead and send in Eric Cartman. Eric, Mr. Nelson is concerned about how you respond to little people.
Oh, did I hurt its little feelings? You know, you think you have the power to make me insecure, but your words are actually completely powerless.
If we could get like 8 of these, we could dress them all up like little beavers, right? And then put them in a pond and see if they build a dam.
You see? No matter what you say, I'm still standing.
Barely.
No matter how you act, I can rise above it.
Rise above it. Get it?
Shut your fucking mouth.
Mr. Nelson!
And so we had that. They literally had the same little midget guy with the same voice in a wheelchair, and they have this guy who's coming in cartoonishly, like picking on him, like, "Hey, Speed Racer, we ought to put a checkered flag on your thing." And he's just like, "My name is Louise, and I am a disabled Latino American, and I will not be treated this way." It was the same voice, it was the same back and forth interaction, and I just looked over at the guy next to me, and I was like, yo, you seen South Park too, right? And he looked over my computer and he just burst out laughing. He's like, I just finished that one. I thought the same thing. Like, it's just all parody and satire. And meanwhile, my manager, Mexican woman, was literally telling us, like, oh, yeah, we're not going to be doing this for much longer, probably. Don't worry about it. Just get through it.
Well, there's DEI seems to have been an avenue, or at least an excuse to hire a lot of politically reliable people for certain factions and to force out politically unpopular but competent people.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? A lot of these complex systems that have details almost everybody forgets about depend on people actually knowing what's going on and being competent.
Mm-hmm.
So when you've got 4 years of DEI and other politicized hiring and firing decisions, we're gonna have safety problems.
Yeah, my adopted father, who I've been staying with, he's a government worker, and he works for the post office, and he was telling us this last time, and we visited like a year ago, and he's told us again. He's just basically the post office is essentially hiring all black workers, and he came in the other day. He's just like, yeah, we got a new hire. Black again. He's like, they don't hire white, they don't hire Mexican, they only hire black people, and a couple of them that have come in just like to scream racist accusations. And like, you wouldn't think that he would be getting the white people treatment because he's very tan. You know, he's got a lot of Mexican, Latino, Native American in his family. But he's just never been one for the race politics or the political discussion. But he's just like, yeah, I hate to say it, but I'm kind of feeling it. He's just like, why is everybody this particular demographic? It feels a little bit weird. It feels a little picky choosy. I'm like, yeah, it's like, it's not a qualifier for that type of position.
The ethnic spoils system is a known problem in politics. It tended to be common with the Irish about 100 years ago. And people realized, hey, that actually causes problems. And we were supposed to have gotten away from that with the 1964 Civil Rights Act. But now, when people provided ideological excuses, it's back.
Mhm. And it's very prevalent in Texas. It didn't used to be a thing because I know there was a stereotype of like, oh, everywhere you go is white. And it's like, well, yeah, because there's a large portion of white, but like even growing up in West Texas, white people were like the minority. Like it was more black people and Mexican. But now I'm sitting here in North Texas and I'm like, even back when I lived in that, you wouldn't walk into restaurants and it would be like all black owned or all this or all that to like a very, very blaringly obvious degree. You go to a Mexican food restaurant and like borderline everybody be Mexican, Chinese food, everybody be Chinese. But like you just see certain businesses now that it's just all one or two particular demographics. Like I went to apply for a job folding burritos and it was just all of one particular race and they all flocked the counter when I was like trying to give my resume to the manager and have a discussion with her and they were just all like staring at me almost in like a kind of intimidating way and I was just like, what the fuck is happening? Like this is it's a little bit extra right now. It's
Yeah,
like, and it makes you feel bad to say it because it's just like I don't have a problem with immigrants or I have a problem with people that have a problem with me, especially when you don't fucking know me.
this is kind of an inevitable result of an ideology that emphasizes ethnic differences. You end up with a situation where if there's political advantage from highlighting ethnic differences, it's going to cause people to clump together, either hoping to get something from the ethnic patronage network or fear of the ethnic patronage network. If the policing breaks down, you end up with ethnic enclaves because people are going to try to find safety among people in their social network, and that oftentimes follows ethnic lines. And as that cycle increases, you end up with a lot more distrust, a lot more discrimination, a lot more genuine reasons for fear. And if it goes on too strong, you can end up with civil war. And you had something like that in Yugoslavia. You had something like that in Chechnya. It's a lot of Americans were blasé about the idea that ethnic politics could result in catastrophic consequences, but American liberals around 2008 didn't seem to see that as a problem they should worry about. And now we've got the rise of neo-racists like Richard Hanania and others. And they're not the ones who caused it. They're simply the reaction that's inevitable whenever the effort to use political power to advantage one or a few groups ends up being resented by people who recognize that some things really are discriminatory.
Yeah, and it kind of worries me for Texas because like it's almost like the ideology isn't thicker here, but the results, the outcome of it, are more visible. I feel like because Oregon, at the end of the day, is mostly just white people bitching. But here, it has everything that Oregon could possibly want, but can't seem to hope to achieve. And but it's become like so blaringly obvious with the problem and things going on that like my mother she got out of church the other day and she started telling me that their preacher put out a statement because brotherhood apparently plastered the entire town with flyers basically calling out the immigration situation and what needed to be done about it, and the church wanted to like put out a statement about it, say we're not tied to this. If any members of our church are associated with this, this is not welcome here. And I'm just kind of like, okay, so it's Oregon with higher population density. I don't know because like all the cities around Dallas are interconnected. It's one. That's why they call it the Metroplex. It's a giant connected area that's eventually just going to look like fucking Coruscant from the sky. So it's like having more numbers, having it all packed together in certain areas. Yeah, the tensions are just different. The racism here, like we've definitely had a racism problem in Texas. No one's ever denied that. But it was certainly softer, lighter, and more under the surface previously, I feel like. But I feel like the most outwardly racist and volatile are those on the left and those in the immigrant population, which is just kind of like shitty to say, but it's like it just kind of is what it is. And then you look at the UK and what's going on over there, and it's like, oh, are we on our way to that? Yeah, we're on our way to that.
I had a weird moment when I realized, oh, a lot of the left-wing attitude towards all cultures are equal and other stuff like that, it's because they don't actually see people as having ideas from their family and community and other stuff. They're just mascots. It's not, they aren't actually looking at minorities as people with a full range of human agency and moral choice.
It's the truest form of white saviorism, which is a concept that these types of people very heavily rallied against in the beginning. It's just like we know what's best for these people, and maybe in turn they know what's best for us. And it's like, yeah, the group of the dead baby coffins. Do we think they know best? I'm starting to think they might not be the good guys, you guys. Israel is guilty of war crimes. That's what it is. Where it's true. Not gonna deny that. but they're not walking around with dead Palestinian baby coffins. You know, they're not reading fucking Nazi books. Like, Hamas is a Nazi ideology. But sure, let's cry about how Ukraine's not getting funding for their white supremacists anymore. It's so fucking convoluted that people really can't see the pieces this far in and are still willing to stand by their fucking bullshit and say that everything's okay when it's clearly not.
It's it's the modern left-wing ideology is not internally consistent. So there's a lot of emotional defense mechanisms that people employ to try to continue to think of themselves as a good person in a good community, but they're breaking down because they can't last forever because reality reasserts itself and reality is consistent. So if they can't be consistent, they're going to do dumb stuff.
And I feel like, and we could cut this out if you don't want to talk about it publicly, because if not, I understand. But that's kind of how the whole Larry situation boiled down. I feel like reality caught up, couldn't stay consistent, couldn't keep up with the initial message, didn't understand what he was coming into or why, came into it with motives for himself, for personal gain, financial gain, even, none of which happened. And whenever that realization occurred and that snap started to happen, well, then you have the recording that I shared. And that's what fucking scares me.
That looked a bit like ego collapse. Narcissistic ego collapse.
And God, it really painted people with a tendency towards cult-like thinking. I think I've clearly demonstrated that. It is daddy issues at the end of the day. It is mommy issues, but it's very much daddy issues because as soon as that Larry thing broke, it was like I had my father screaming at me. The same kind of statements, the same kind of vile, how I'm ungrateful, how I destroyed everything, how his life's ruined because of me. I had to block him from the channel because he said, I no longer support this pedophile or his anti-American agenda. And I'm just like, we're not doing this. Like, I forgive him and everything, but I also am leaving everything intact as a way to like demonstrate that, hey, this is a lifetime demonstration of how this can occur. I was blinded by alien and demon talk. I was blinded by fantastical thinking, by ultimately a false sense of community when I was ultimately being used to start a church or a cult, of which everybody listening this would have been grand members had they stuck around, which I like to think that people wouldn't after these discussions. But it's something that happens on a micro scale and a macro scale. I feel like it could be one people, it could be 3 or 5, like the Z's trans terror cult that's been going on, or it could be lone wolf terrorist attacks, mass shootings. Like, if people don't properly address their demons and their past and their traumas and what they got wrong and fully come to terms with what they got wrong, then the results can be catastrophic for countless people. And then that just has a ripple effect. You know, like I told Larry, you go up and shoot the fucking police station. What did you do? You took away someone's father, you took away someone's mother, you took away someone's child. So it's, and then it just spreads, and then that darkness spreads across the world, and the devil wins. Or you can pull your head out of your fucking ass and realize you're wrong, like I had to do, which was the whole point of this channel. It's a horrible place to come and try that type of shit. But I did allow myself to be blinded, and been reflecting a lot on that. It's not the greatest feeling in the world.
well said. It's a common temptation for people. Their lives are unpleasant, so they try to find positive emotions in something else, and sometimes they create grand theories in their imagination, and their ego defense mechanisms rely on denial or shifting blame to someone else rather than genuinely trying to understand what's going on.
Hmm. Yeah, and I might cut this part out, I might not, but I finally figured out his middle name because that whole ICE government paperwork with that Larry Bollinger from Haiti, that had me freaked out because I thought that was his middle name, but I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure it's not Larry. It's not Larry, but I did find his actual middle name, and I found the court paperwork from his Chapter 13 bankruptcy, and I read through all that. Even for a layman like me, only speculation, but it,
He had no idea what he was frickin' doing.
none. And it was just suspicious from the get go, and everybody's out to get me, and these are the people who've wronged me. It's cluster B, it's narcissism, it's deflection, it's me versus the system, even though I've clearly done wrong. It it's not okay. It's everything I wanted to teach people about, and I taught it. Just at a bit of a cost, because as I mentioned before, when you have to go around telling people you had planned conversations with, hey, I just had to put out a video of an old buddy of mine threatening to shoot up a police station, you can imagine that people are going to distance themselves from that, understandably, because I don't want to get anybody in trouble, because there's a lot of important people with important fights to be had, but not fun fucking emails to type out at all. And you just sound fucking crazy because this is a lot to explain in a couple of paragraphs.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to say it, but yes, being associated with that kind of situation would hurt someone's credibility.
Yeah. It really would,
Um,
especially when I was like telling them, like, hey, I feel like Larry's the missing piece. He's gonna come in and tell the feds, like, this is where they're selling the children, this is what they're doing and how. And I really thought we were gonna do some good work on that. And then it's just like, all right, man, I put my faith in you and you just this is all bullshit. All right. Well, I have to bite the bullet for that one, and I'll do it. I'm bowing out. Gonna write my story. I've got a lot of projects planned after this, but it's just like I had a lot of plans for the podcast and videos planned that I just realized aren't gonna come out now because I'm just like it's a stupidly tragic end that only this channel can provide. This has been a very, very unique adventure.
you've got the skills to push forward and continue building.
Yeah.
This doesn't have to be the end. I think your skills are best served in writing, conveying your experiences and insights into fiction that other people can kind of soak up some of the lessons from. You do have practical insights that could be conveyed in podcast form. But I think you have learned to be a bit more cautious now because of the situation with Larry.
Yeah. Which you'd think I would have learned after my situation with Antifa or 3 or 4 other crazy people in my life or my father, but
Well, I think dealing with your father is why you had such, I hate to say it, but gullibility problems.
yeah. No, it's a fair analysis, and it's like, and it's gonna sound so stupid and so crazy, all things considered. There's still some of those alien stories I think are genuine. but maybe not. I'm gonna leave it at a mystery. It's gonna be my life's greatest mystery. Was that part bullshit or not? Chances are it was. But I mean, for everyone else right now who's probably agreeing that I'm fucking crazy and saying that, the power of belief can push us in crazy places. Like, I haven't even been watching any alien videos the last 3 or 4 weeks. I know the drone situation's going on. It's one of my few bitches with Donald Trump is I'm like, "Oh, he's actually more confident in covering this up. This is fucking insane." Thought he was gonna be the UFO disclosure president. Nope. But I've had to, like, pull out of that stuff so hard because, like, at least for the moment, as much as I love it and enjoy it, because if I don't catch myself in that belief, like, I don't know. Clearly, I'm willing to go chasing dragons, but it's like, I don't know. I'm tired of having to slay dragons. I'm tired of having to have all these crazy stories in my life. I want to figure out how to simmer down and be relaxed because all this has done is just reactivate like panic and anxiety and feelings that I had like kind of leaving Antifa, and I'm trying not to let that build up. Like, I'm going to go back to therapy and work on some things. But it's like, well, I feel like it's pushing forward. Like, psychologically, some things in my mind kind of went backward, and I'm having to like take some time to readjust because I mean, behind the scenes, you got this guy who's calling me at 3 in the morning. They're watching me. They're breaking into my house. They just attacked my dog. They're watching you. At one point, he almost had me convinced that the former Antifa guy that I had spoken to wound up dead in a river and that they were coming for me next. And I spent like an hour or two researching whether or not this guy was dead. So it's like that level of paranoia, which then, of course, goes into I'm going to shoot at the police station. It's like, I can't go back to that. I can't go back to everyone around me being psychotic and fucking insane and seeing me as some type of person that can get them what they want. Like, I've realized over this, I have a tendency to overextend, and that's what gets me into a lot of trouble. And I think that's even shown on the podcast. The more I think of what's been going on in the podcast, it's just like I feel like I spent a lot of time trying to play vigilante. And I feel like I got some good stuff out of it, but like going to do the undercover job at Venture Data, vigilante, trying to figure out the human trafficking ties, vigilante, like I wanted to go out and be the hero of my city, but in the end it's just like, yeah, this isn't something I can do for the rest of my life at all. I have a lot of respect for actual reporters and investigative journalists and people who work to get this type of shit done because
The impulse to do good can easily be channeled into bad directions. And actually doing good takes not just a desire to do good, but an accurate assessment of the situation and self-discipline to prevent one from making mistakes or being twisted. It's a heck of a lot harder than it looks.
Yep. That's what this was. That's what Antifa was. Like, oh, if we're all a group of people that care about a common good at the end of the day, so long as we're willing to band together and fight for each other no matter what and cover up each other's crimes and never speak on anything, we'll be okay.
Like the mafia?
Right? Like so many of these things, it's I hope there's more understanding on this type of behavior as time goes on. I feel like we're in a good place in society where people are willing to look at it, but I think the thing I've been begging from this channel for people is look at the darker side. Larry is the darker side. My my side's dark, but his shit gets darker because for a lot of the fucking untruths in there, there's a lot of fucking truths in there, and the truest ones are the darkest ones. Not all of them. I'm not gonna pick and choose here because I'm still in a mode of questioning, but shit like the occult, shit like drug trade, you know, all these kids in Eugene and anywhere else in the fucking country that are just overdosing. It's like, what pushed them to get those drugs? It wasn't that their school was bad or that was bullied necessarily. It's that their fucking mama raped them or someone had their fucking head blown off in front of them and they never took the time to fucking talk about it. It's all the, I don't know, just need more world mixing, being willing to not shield away from a scary story, but not allowing that, not walking away from a scary story to push you as far as it did me, to where you think you're helping someone and then ultimately they snap. But it's just like the world's a lot darker than people want to get credit for, and the longer they ignore it, the worse it's going to get, until it's just in your face every day.
That's true. I'm trying to decide whether I should maybe mention some of the psychology around it uh, or give another story about it.
Why not both?
Okay. One of the major stress reactions is avoidance. People avoid dealing with something that is stressful. And acknowledging that there are, shall we say, dysfunctional family relationships, I'm saying that very euphemistically, is uncomfortable. So people avoid talking about it. That became, but it becomes the elephant in the room. One of the implications is that periodically you end up with disclosures, people getting upset, maybe something gets done, and then gradually the undercurrent of avoidance comes back. The organizations or people set up to tackle the problem become ineffective or corrupted or just break down through normal processes. And then another round of disclosures happens. The people who pay attention feel like they're treated like they're crazy. The people in power who would take the blame if something bad goes on keep on trying to deny it because they'd have to admit that they aren't perfect or that they don't have full power or they just don't want the consequences of the blame. And it becomes a tug of war of power between acknowledging there's a problem and denying there's a problem. And a lot of the public in the middle generally doesn't notice it. And then if the problem gets too big, the people who acknowledge the problem get in power, and then they're under pressure to claim that the problem is getting better, and it doesn't always get better.
Yeah, that's a perfect summary of America.
It's a perfect summary of political life.
Oh. But yeah, no, I feel like that's a perfect summary of a lot of things, because, like, the crazies are right about so much. And you keep telling a fucking crazy person that they're fucking crazy. The ultimate effect is it's just going to drive them more fucking crazy. And, I mean, the same could be said for, like, Proud Boys and Antifa, both in their worst moments. It's like, it's a group of people with their own theories, their own speculation, who all know that they're getting fucked over by the government, who will all say in passing, "Oh, it's really just it's all a two-party system and they're both the same," but they'll both pretend like they're fucking not whenever it comes to breaking out into fighting. And it's just like government plays on that and says, "You're crazy, you're crazy, you're crazy, you're crazy, you're crazy, you're crazy." And ultimately they're like, "All right, we're going to show you how fucking crazy we are." It's not healthy.
It's, yeah, that's definitely a problem. I think some of it is that people, when they say that a lot of people say the two-party system is kind of a joke. It's a little more complicated than that. Parties are not just supposed to be platforms, they're also people. They're information networks. They provide alternatives. You might not think it's a real alternative, but when you have one clique in power for too long, they just accumulate incompetent people, corruption, things they forgot, and the potential opposition ends up collecting information, talent, disaffected people. So there's normally a political churn. In democracy allows that churn to take place peacefully and with the legitimacy of the entire society. When you interrupt that, you basically prevent a lot of the processes that avoid political decay and political violence. And I find it interesting that the places with the most corrupt elections are also the places with the worst political violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't want to see any political violence here. I really just hope it doesn't turn into one big Oregon. Like, I know it's gonna get violent, especially the cartels dropping bombs with drones at the border now. That's getting a little ballsy.
I'm surprised they weren't doing it earlier.
Yeah, no shit. Yeah, that problem's got me a little worried. Like, everybody I know here has an AR-15, so at the end of the day, it's like we're at least a better society who, if push came to shove, we would fight things off. But there's also a stronger sense of reservation about being pushed to that point here as opposed to Oregon. Like, it would take a lot to get the people here up in arms.
Well, in America, there's more gun owners, and the cartels can corrupt stuff, but there's limits to what they can impose. In Mexico, gun ownership is very heavily restricted, and the cartels can basically kill whoever they want.
Like the West Coast.
Oh, God. I am 90% convinced that the San Francisco Public Defender's Office is controlled by the Sinaloa cartel, as
shit.
well as a whole bunch of other places along the West Coast.
That's a big claim. Explain that one a little bit.
The Sinaloa cartel was bringing in people from Central America to deal drugs in various areas. So the prosecutor's office offered a plea deal, basically a sweetheart plea deal that would only be offered in a very drug tolerant place. Okay, we caught you dealing drugs here 20 times, but if you promise to stay away from these major drug dealing locations, except when you're on public transit, we'll let you go. So what did the public defender's office do? They decided to fight the prohibition from the distance to the drug dealing locations, rather than say, yes, we won, we got a sweetheart deal.
God, and the entirety of California and Oregon, Washington, places like that are prepped for that because, I mean, they'll just let any drug dealer, user walk around. You could deal in public, cops they don't give a shit. They'll take your drugs at the very most. I think they're softening some of those laws. I think they're getting rid of some of them now that it's becoming less decriminalized, but I mean, you live in a society about that, you wouldn't even blink hearing that story, most people. You'd be like, oh, yeah, I mean, it happens every day. What are you going to do? It leaves the perfect cover for all of that. So they can just be like, no, we do this all the time. Look, here's 50 other drug dealers not associated with the cartels that I did this to last week. It's just a normal process. Some evil shit.
We're living through the 30s again. Not just totalitarian ideologies, but also organized crime. I really hope we don't have the 1940s.
Well, if the Hopi prophecy of Turtle Island is anything to go by, I still love that prophecy. Basically talks about North America in the time of a great global war, fighting off armies that tried to amass by sea and land, and that the leader of the Red Hat people would come in, and that North America would be known as Turtle Island, and essentially fight off all the other forces, and that America would be reborn. And I'm just sitting here the other day, I'm flipping through the news, and Trump's just like casually talking about putting iron domes up, and I'm like, I think if there is a World War III, I'm going to listen to the natives on this. They got some positive thinking on what's about to happen if it does happen. I'm a sucker for a good prophecy, and you hear some stuff like that, and you're like, maybe we do got a chance.
I should look into that.
You should look it up real quick. It's a super short prophecy. I'm sure you can find an article on it. It's so goddamn specific. It's about as specific as that book in the 1800s, Baron Trump and the Last President of the United States of America, where the last president comes in and crashes Wall Street and the stock market, and everything just comes to a standstill, and all the rich people can't do any corrupt crimes anymore. And it's a time in post-America where the slaves have been freed, but all Americans, I guess, in turn, become enslaved by corporate dictators, and they're being put to work 24/7, and they can't afford to get by.
What's the last one? What should I search for?
I think it's called Baron Trump and the Last President of America or something like that. I've only heard people talk about it. I haven't actually read it, but the way people describe it, I'm like, that is so. The Trump time traveler theories, the more time goes on, I'm just like, maybe that's why he's so tight-lipped about the aliens.
Okay.
There's just a lot of weird things surrounding Trump that it's like you don't want to sound too QAnon-y about it, but like you kind of hear and read certain things and you're like, all right, that's fucking weird. It's very specific.
All right. I'll take a bit of a look into them.
It's really fun. Especially the Hopis, like I said, had a lot of contact with aliens. They knew some shit. So if World War III breaks out, it's going to be bloody. But I think we got this. I think there's a renewed sense of patriotism going on that kind of gives us a chance.
It's really remarkable. There haven't been a lot of practical changes, and woke is still causing problems, but there's an actual sense of hope. And it feels like America's a defender of democracy again. Did you see J.D. Vance's Munich speech?
I heard like a little tidbit. Men don't have to be afraid again. I don't know if that was the same speech, but no, explain it to me.
At a security conference, which tends not to actually do any practical work. It's just politicians backslapping each other and acting like they're knowledgeable. He pointed out that Western Europe was imprisoning people for speech. Their citizens were being attacked. People who were complaining were being jailed. And why should America defend countries that don't share basic American values?
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within. the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizens suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth.
It was great, but the professional international relations class ended up being horrified. Oh, he embarrassed us in front of the world.
Yeah, should be embarrassed by that. It's pretty
I
embarrassing.
think Europe should be
behavior.
embarrassed by that.
It's not good. You're going full fucking jihad. Data ain't private anymore. You can't call a fucking lesbian a lesbian without being thrown behind bars. People are getting raped out in the streets. Yeah, it's not a good fucking look. It's embarrassing.
So it kind of became the self-serving international relations elite versus J.D. Vance. And I love that guy. He was absolutely freaking right.
Like, haven't listened to too much of his like speeches on his own, but like he was one of those guys that went around and just talked to podcasters like Tim Dillon and different comedians and stuff. He's human. You get these other politicians on there, they're just having an agenda and they're just talking out the mouth, and you could tell that there's something behind the scenes. This is just talking about his family and about his life and about what he believes and where he wants to see America go. And it was incredibly genuine. I was surprised. I was like, damn. I thought that Trump was going to have a vice presidential pick that was just foamy at the mouth, wrecking ball just like him, ready to go, go, go. And I see this guy and I'm like, probably a good balance to have in his orbit for the crazier moments.
I would like to point out J.D. Vance was a junior enlisted guy. Not the typical spend all your time worried about your reputation officer.
He's got structure. Like, it's very apparent. Like, he's fucking tall. I'm just like, Jesus. I mean, not sounding like I'm sucking the guy's dick too hard here, but I was just like, seeing him at the inauguration next to other people, I was just like, damn.
I could tell he was very controlled and calculating in the vice presidential debate.
Was that the one that they had where everyone was like, "Oh my god, this was actually a sane and normal debate"?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. That was a good one.
I bet that with every fiber of his being, he wanted to point out Walz's cowardice, but he knew that it wouldn't play well politically, so he didn't do it.
It'd been too easy of a shot. There was enough easy shots being taken that entire election. Like, it was just like watching someone in like a boxing ring just getting their face pounded in constantly, and the ref's not blowing the whistle because he's just having a good time.
I I know it's a factually easy shot. It would probably a lot of Democrats cling to the idea of Walz as a hero to try to avoid having to think about how they mishandled the military and how angry current and former military people are at them. But my God, I hate Walz.
What's he doing now? I feel like he's kind of faded out.
He seemed to be setting the stage for a presidential run.
That's right. I forgot about
I
that.
hope the Democrats pick him because he's so horrible. It would be a shoo-in for whoever the Republican candidate would be. But Walz probably is not going to win the presidential campaign. He's probably more focused on the fallout from a whole bunch of the corruption issues in Minnesota right now.
Has
They had
anything with USAID tracked back to that yet?
no, that seems to be purely local stuff.
Okay.
So, for example, Feeding Our Future, hundreds of millions of dollars of fraudulent reimbursements were paid.
Jeez.
And that's not the only corruption story. So, Minnesota had a budget surplus, raised taxes, and now they've got a pretty bad deficit. And almost all that went to fraud.
Jeez. That's one thing I'm noticing about a lot of the blue cities. I was watching this YouTuber the other day, and just going through all these like scammers for like food stamps and government assistance. Apparently, it's just a whole trend on TikTok now to explain publicly to millions of followers how you scam the system, why you did it, and why you're entitled to it. But I guess these same accounts, these people are starting to get like reported and shit's coming back to them, and they're just having panicked freakouts. Like one lady was like, I have a 2017 Tahoe. Okay. It is nothing that fancy. I get like, I think she said like 5, 6 grand from the government every month or two. And I have 3 kids and I don't need to work. I don't have to work. And there's another girl, she's just like, my husband works for me, and this is how much I get on government assistance. She's like, I do not drive. I do not work. I do not do anything like this. And then the next video, she's just fucking tears because it's all crumbling down. And I'm like, yeah, this is gonna be. Yeah. It's because, like, it's the publicity behind it. Everyone has to, like, unveil their master plan to the entire fucking world. It's like you live in a
Well,
control like this, like these politics that say the world's gonna end tomorrow. Your government's fucking you. Get what's yours. Don't worry about it. The world's gonna end tomorrow. There'll be no consequences for that. And then the end of the world never comes. And then it's like, oh shit.
I mean, I noticed a few things. One, if it's genuine, why would someone reveal their scam? Ego, they might be narcissists and wanting some sort of public validation for it. So there might be some cluster B stuff associated with it. So if there's a rise in cluster B, will there be a rise in financial fraud?
Larry.
Then you end up with another situation, which is, are the people putting forth these scam guides doing it because they're scammers and proud of it, or because an organization is setting them up to encourage scams in other countries?
Explain that one a little bit.
Well, the videos might be in the feed for someone in one country, but if there's a hostility between two countries, it would be very easy to encourage fraud to wear down the system by simply having a guy in one country do a video on a guide to fraud, post it in the other country, watch fraud increase.
That's actually smart. Damn. I didn't even consider that.
So that's one of the things I've been wondering about, and a couple of these videos have been found using non-US currency. It's stage prop currency. So I kind of wonder.
Well, it just kind of reminds me of the whole Chosen One phenomena that's on YouTube. It's like all these accounts are Russian, but it's all these Americans posting about how they're God and how they're here to guide the world and they're Neo from the fucking Matrix. But you're like, that Russian account's been up 2 days and it has 1 million followers. What the hell? So I can see that.
I noticed when Nathan Rich was being shared around a lot. You probably don't know about him. He's a former Scientologist, former drug user. If China was following their immigration laws, he would never be allowed into China. He was allowed into China, and then a couple months later started producing a whole bunch of YouTube videos, often subtitled in Chinese, directed towards English speakers, with a whole bunch of stuff. So if China violates their immigration laws to let him in, and then he's suddenly producing a whole lot of video content, that kind of suggests that something else is going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I just looked him up. I don't recognize the guy, but I could tell by the thumbnails. Very, very pro-Chinese. It's very interesting. What the fuck? It's the varying levels of degrees of different agents that they just have in all their different forms is just wild. And all the dysfunction, I feel like, just lays like the perfect cover in this country for people to come in. It's like one thing that like horrified me is when they figured out, I think it was like a Russian spy, but essentially like transitioned and then went into the CIA. And basically the transition documents and all of that kind of helped with the fabrication and the lie to kind of push them forward. And it's just like at the end of the day, they weren't even trans. I'm just like,
I don't know about that, but that's definitely been a problem with organized crime, pedophiles, and men getting put into women's prisons.
God. Trump hasn't revoked that one yet, right? It's just women in sports. I don't think
No. He directed that men be taken out of women's prisons and put in male prisons.
those guys are in for a rough fucking time. That's even if you're not a pedophile, you're gonna get treated like one. Even if you're not a rapist, you're gonna get treated like one, and that's kind of unfortunate. But also, a lot of people in these prisons special requested it and wouldn't have been put there initially to begin with. So I think a lot of the more sane people probably stayed in their place.
Only about 50% of them are convicted of sex crimes. That doesn't mean they're innocent, but maybe half of them are at lower risk than the other half.
It's just, and for a lot of those people that are probably just thrown in there, they're like, "Oh, you have to go into this prison now." I feel bad for them, but it's just like knowing the things I've heard about prison culture. It's like stories like that permeating the media. It's not going to be great for a lot of people going in, and that's damage caused by the system. It's like that was never a good idea to begin with, ever.
The change is going to hurt, but in Canada, the prison system didn't even have a choice. So if an extremely high-risk prisoner, like someone who doctors concluded would never stop raping, gets put in a women's prison and they keep on raping women, I have absolutely no sympathy for a system that doesn't even do basic risk assessment.
This, I'm just glad that this trans nightmare is dying. Like,
It's dying, it's not dead.
No.
And there can still be a lot of damage in the meantime. I know it sounds kind of boring, but one of the things I'm working on right now is Colorado is considering a bill to make it a misdemeanor, that is 120 days in jail, or in this specific kind of misdemeanor, 120 days in jail or about $1,000 fine for deliberately misgendering someone on a death certificate.
Jeez.
So a funeral director or coroner, they're going to be in trouble.
Even if they get someone in, they're just like, don't even know they're trans. This is vagina. This is a pair of tits. Puts down female. Jesus.
Well, so okay, on the face of it, okay, looks absurd. Dig down a little more. What are death certificates used for? Knowing why people died. We care because we want to stop people dying. Remember the big fight about death certificates during COVID?
Yeah. Yeah, because then
Oh,
you're just skewing the information then, huh?
yeah.
That. It's. And this is coming from the transgender class. This is old school transsexuals, people that actually know what they're dealing with. They're not the ones calling for this shit. A lot of them are like, when I'm dead, I'm dead.
If you genuinely want transgender or transsexual people to be healthy, you want to know what they were born as, what they died as, so you can see, are there certain things that cause people to die more than others? If they transitioned, that's medical data that people should be able to look at and say, okay, this seems to be killing people more than that.
Yep.
If you simply deny everything, you can't find out why people are dying and try to fix it.
It's almost like this ideology wants trans people to die.
It really does look like it.
I really do believe that's what a lot of this is. They wanted these kids to feel bullied, to feel isolated, to feel alone, to go fucking crazy, to create their own fantasies. Canada says, "Oh, you're trans and didn't work for you. Get in the pod." This was all an operation. I feel like they took actual legitimate transsexual medicine. They took this actual practice that actually helped alleviate a lot of pain for people. They brought it in on such a mass scale, and they said, you know what? Back in the day, we didn't want the anxious, we didn't want the weak, we didn't want the mentally feeble, we didn't want the immigrants, and they used this as a way to attack all of those communities. Like, you look in Canada, the amount of fucking clinics they put in First Nation communities, very much heavier than other areas, just like we put Planned Parenthood in more black communities in America. It's all eugenics. They want the weak to die, and if they have to go out looking like a clown when they do it, then that's just funnier. They can all laugh. It's fucking dark.
And that sounds hyperbolic, but at this point, that's one of the few explanations that is logically consistent.
It's eugenics. It's the ghost of Margaret Sanger come back to haunt us. Greatest socialist of America ever knew, according to the Nazis.
Oh, we live in profoundly stupid times.
Yeah.
So, one of the other side effects of that death certificate bill is that it would make it very difficult to get useful medical data cheaply. It's possible to get medical data, but you'd have to pay medical data brokers and other people for it. So if you remove the ability to look at health outcomes cheaply, the only people who can afford to realize what's going on are either insiders or people with a lot of money to spend.
Yeah. It's everything the left stands against, but will fight tooth and nail for.
Well, every month, I am surprised at the level of democratic hypocrisy. And one bit of, you know that not Vermont, Sarah McBride. Just double checking something quickly.
No worries.
Yep, Young Conway, Delaware. Yep. Okay. Yep. Confirmed it. You know, Delaware used to be the hub for a whole bunch of business and corporations and corporate law and tax loopholes and the like.
Yeah.
Well, they started getting wilder and wilder with that. Things like having warehouses that could evade U.S. customs and stuff like that.
Delaware is where Joe Biden was operating before president, right? Like that was his territory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Delaware was going so crazy with the way they were poking holes in the customs system and corporate law system that they even got a whole bunch of free market think tankers angry at them. So even a lot of free market guys who don't like corporate taxes and think corporations should be able to do their own thing were saying, hey, Delaware's out of control. A lot of the more socialist Democrats, like Elizabeth Warren, were also making a point about how out of control Delaware is.
Oh, damn.
So when you've got both the Elizabeth Warren types and the free market guys angry at Delaware and their basic non-enforcement of basic corporate accountability and customs, then what pops up? Joe Biden goes all in on trans stuff. So one way of looking at Joe Biden's embrace of trans ideology is it's a way to draw attention away from the corporate and financial shenanigans in Delaware.
Damn. From what you're describing, it sounds like Delaware is just a little Switzerland.
That's presenting themselves as Switzerland was the ideal. That's what they presented themselves as, not what they are.
Well, I meant as far as like corporate, like keeping people away from the books, like offshore stuff, so to speak. Like
Oh,
keeping things where you can't have the government come in and look. Like, oh, if you go to Delaware, your files will be safe here.
yeah, they basically advertise themselves as secretive corporate accounts, help avoid scrutiny, stuff like that.
Well, that's not great.
And if it was just that, I wouldn't be complaining so much. But when you have warehouses in the US that aren't able to be inspected by customs?
That's a problem.
Yeah.
Makes you gotta wonder how many kids, how many drugs, how many guns, how much money.
Well, probably not guns, but definitely I'm wondering about drugs.
You didn't rule out kids either. Shit.
So, um, when you've got more calls for investigations into Delaware and more businesses pulling out of Delaware because their judges couldn't restrain themselves to keep the corporate law gravy train rolling, then out comes Sarah McBride.
Explain Sarah McBride a little bit, because I heard the name, but I'm not familiar.
Young activist in Delaware Democratic Party politics, related to people in one of the big corporate law firms, Young Conway, was involved with one of the major donor families to Joe Biden. So basically, they were handpicked for that position.
Oh. The way they use these little activists. Is just.
The people propping up Greta Thunberg did not remotely
Yep.
care about Greta Thunberg.
I was just thinking Greta Thunberg. Like propping up fake arrest, having her sail on a sailboat to across the seas just to scream at people about climate change, get them all on this bullshit Green New Deal initiative. Like,
And you could, and she didn't actually care about it that much, because when asked for reasons, she kind of stammered, but she couldn't give an argument for why she favored a particular policy position. These
but
lines
she's
were
so
fed
young
to
and she's autistic and she has Asperger's and she's so this and you don't see kids acting like that anymore. And it's just
she
like,
doesn't look autistic to me.
I definitely feel like she has like Downs or Asperger's or something. I don't even know necessarily what Asperger's is, full honesty. The doctors told me I had it growing up, and I'm just like, I don't know. Maybe I don't look into it because it has a
Um,
silly name, but
in the past, it was considered to be a condition with some kinds of social deficits, similar to autism, but far more functional. Right now, it is classified as an autism spectrum disorder. The thing is, there's no clear way to categorize this stuff. So, is autism a certain kind of extra growth of neuronal connections? Maybe. Is it a result of different structures in the brain being more developed than others? Maybe. There's no clear way to categorize this stuff, so a whole bunch of stuff gets given the label autistic, but or autism spectrum disorder or Asperger's, but it's not a clearly understood thing.
yeah. And it makes growing up with card because, like, I know I have Asperger's. I know I have a couple of things, or not Asperger's, but autism. But they threw so many diagnoses at me as a kid that, like, I don't know, like bipolar, I feel like I definitely had, but I feel like I worked my way out of it, but I still have moments. But I look at it and I'm like, because I know the lady who like discovered bipolar disorder and what it was, she discovered it after having worked through it. So it is something you can naturally work through. But like when you grow up and the doctors are just throwing every label at you under the sun trying to figure out what you are and you get older, it's like, well, fuck, what do I have? It's kind of difficult to grapple with.
And maybe you have the things you were diagnosed with, maybe not. Some doctors just love to throw labels at people so their kids can get special ed permissions or help. Others, it gives the illusion of control, and others, they just read a checklist and everything that kind of looks like it matches up gets the diagnosis.
Yeah. And it's just, oh my God, I found this really great video. I'd say it's conspiratorial, but the more I listened to it, the more it just fucking made sense. But essentially, I found this video that are you aware of the GT program in the U.S., the Gifted and Talented?
Oh, there's various different ones.
I think this one was called Gate. The Gate program.
Oh, this one.
Ah, you know about this one. Like, my friend sent it to me, she, like, emailed me, and she's just like, "I thought this was crazy, I found it online, but then I remembered the testing room, and I started having all these weird flashbacks, and now I'm reading the comments, and now I'm getting into my head." For people out there, essentially, there's a phenomena where kids like me and other kids that I knew who were put into the Gifted and Talented program were essentially put through a filtration system of where they could and couldn't wind up in society, and essentially this document I found that this guy has breaks down the different structures and tiers of the system and where statistically these kids wind up going in society and where they're allowed to excel at and where they aren't, and talking about certain kids like me in my situation who I was told at certain points I couldn't read and I couldn't write, even though those were my greatest subjects. I was like top reader in my school. You can't do this. You don't know how to socialize. You don't know this. And it like gets into your head. And then they put you into all these different subcategories. But he just had like this amazing breakdown of the whole process and started tying it into Nazism in different communist countries that had implemented similar systems. And I was just like, I want to. I'll send you the video, and I want to get your take on it next time we talk because, like, at first I was like, "This is bullshit," and then I just kept listening, and I'm like,
Okay.
maybe not.
I don't know that video. I do know that there was a program to select gifted and talented kids uh, in uh, hopefully for government service or technological development, etc. In the past. But something the program managers wanted was compliant kids, not not assertive, not hostile, not skeptical kids.
Yeah.
And one of the observations from that was that those who were compliant tended to pick up dumb ideas and tended to just kind of be a cog, but not an actual protector of the system that they were in. Whereas those who were more combative tended to become critics of the current government. Back when the government was anti-communist, the combative gifted kids might have been drawn to communism. When the government is kind of crypto-Marxist, the combative gifted kids tend to become libertarians or or MAGA.
Yeah.
So by trying to only select compliant kids, they may have actually destabilized the system.
Yeah, that was one element of it. And then there's also the kids who would have been more in the spectrum where I was, to where we're kind of in like this creative la la land. And this is kind of where the stuff starts to get fun too, is because it starts talking about essentially psychic programs, how intuitive these kids are to certain situations, different frequencies they can pick up on. A lot of these kids who've gone through this program talk about being chased by like shadow people, seeing the same kind of like visual psychological imagery that I kind of describe on the channel, and talking about how school officials would essentially bring them in and question them on it, or how then you have like the more paranoid side of it where it starts to get into chosen one territory of like, oh, the government's been following me and the police have been following me and they know that I can see this thing and I can communicate with these entities. It goes off into so many different directions, but the more I listen to it, at least this one video, I was just like, this kind of makes sense. And then I think about the other kids who've grown up that I know who are put in these categories, and I kind of see where they're at now. And yeah, you see that the kids who were in different tiers shot up, are in like more like stable lives, families, all that. And then there's more kids like me and the friend that emailed me, to where occult interest, we have experiences seeing things under psychedelics or otherwise, or shadow people via extraordinary amounts of medication that, kind of like you said, these doctors are putting pills in your mouth so you can get into certain programs. I was doped the hell up this entire process. But it just like makes you wonder, even if it's like less conspiratorial as like
Oh,
all of
well,
this, it just kind of show you that it can do more damage than good, I think.
here, with that aspect, here's what I think's going on. There's a slight correlation between schizophrenia and high IQ. People with schizophrenia have a tendency to hallucinate. So if the tendency to hallucinate is correlated with high IQ, you're going to have high IQ people who hallucinate. But people who hallucinate tend to be kind of scary for people in bureaucracies because they don't know how well a person is able to recognize they're hallucinating or how well they deal with the stress from hallucinating. So they tend to get shunted away from anything important. So if someone has schizophrenia, is hallucinating, they don't realize it, and they're screened by this kind of program, they'll probably be shunted aside. So they're going to end up on the bottom. Part of it is that being a high IQ person with a poor social support structure is going to cause them to have a lot more problems than ordinary people. And the other part is people with schizophrenia tend to have a lot more problems than other people. They tend to live, one estimate was about 20 years shorter on average. So stress, bad diet, I don't know what else. I wish I knew more, but part of the problem is data collection. We just don't know that much about why schizophrenic people die early. So when you've got high IQ people with schizophrenia, yeah, I would expect them to be scared, isolated, shoved aside by the bureaucracy.
So, like, another part of me wonders too is I'm just like, how much of this was data based? How many kids do they know were having these types of experiences and that went on record and that's just floating around somewhere? And now maybe we're sitting here like 15, 20 years later and they know who these kids are. They have a, say, predictability model on how these kids are going to form, how they're likely to grow up to be unstable in a lot of certain different parameters across life. And now you see a lot of this algorithmic targeting of very particular kinds of people and driving up their paranoia levels. It's kind of makes you wonder if, I don't know, to what degree I guess these experiences were documented and to what degree that documentation's gotten out and is being used against people.
I would assume a bunch of this stuff was documented, but because it's government bureaucracy, I wouldn't automatically assume that someone put all the records together.
Fair point. I just don't trust any of the systems anymore. You think about something as simple as the gifted and talented program when you're a kid and you hear all this crazy stuff and you're just like, well, fuck, how'd they get me here? Like, what happened here? Because those programs as a kid are just, American schooling sucks.
And the GATE program seems to have been implemented in only a few of those gifted and talented programs, not all of them.
Point two, I wonder what different programs went to like red areas versus blue areas, given how unstable the blue areas are.
Oh, well, that was implemented generations ago, so it probably didn't have the same distribution.
That's true, because I think it started in the 80s or the 90s, right?
60s, I thought.
Shit. Yeah, I'm not even sure if I was necessarily specifically on the GATE program. I know GT, but like, it just kind of made me like think real hard about childhood and all the times I was told I couldn't do it. Or there was a point where I went to a new school and they wanted to put like a fucking literal helmet on me and have a teacher walk me to class. My dad had to look at me and be like, my kid's he's got some problems. He's not that fucking retarded. Like, what are you talking about? Like, they were trying to like tout I have escorts and all these like weird special privileges that like kind of focus you out as the one kid in class. And I'm just sitting here like, dude, I'm just bad at math. This is too much what y'all are doing to these kids. And it's one of the few moments where my biological father actually came through and like fought one of the good fights and was just like, no, you're not going to treat my fucking kid like this. This isn't right. But I imagine a lot of those systems have gotten worse. Not in Texas though, because my mom works with like special needs students and those types of kids. And like, I was telling her about all this conspiratorial stuff and what I'd found, and she was like telling me about how the programs operate now and the benefits it gives to the kids. And I'm like, all right, that's pretty good. But then I think about Oregon, and I'm just like, you have a community of all these kids claiming that they're fucking autistic or this or that, and you're trying to create all these special programs for that. You're not going to be able to facilitate that.
I think in there, one, I think that high IQ kids are a kind of special need because people think differently. They end up with different emotional stresses and social problems. I still struggle with the idea that people are imprecise with their wording or that people forget their wording. Well, as a kid, when adults are vague with their wording, that really messes you up.
Yeah.
Or at least it messed me up. I'll always be tolerant, including of that drug dealer who's threatening to kill someone if they don't pay up. How do I learn that that's not what people meant?
Yeah. I can understand that a lot. Like growing up, I could always, I don't, because like as crazy as the stories of my biological father, where my mother was like very stable, we lived in a bad neighborhood, then we moved to the suburbs, and she wanted to like kind of protect me and keep me safe. But things would always be said with like this undertone of they meant something else, and that would always drive me crazy because I was such a curious kid that I always had to dig up what was going on at all times, and that just had a tendency to drive the adults around me crazy. Just stop questioning and just please, for the love of God. But I'm like, but you're not. I don't know. It puts you in like a different thought process than a lot of the other people around you. It's like,
Um,
yeah,
and at least the progressive left has been very hostile to the idea of IQ differences.
mhm.
I mean, it's a very well replicated concept in psychology. It's probably the most reliable psychometric concept.
But it's
But they
racist.
really, what?
But it's racist. That's one I heard before. Often.
Yeah. I mean, they could ask, hey, what's causing these gaps? Maybe it's environmental. You subject a kid to a heck of a lot of stress when they're a kid, their brain's not going to develop the same way. We've got a lot of evidence for that. But they'd rather say it's racist rather than look into, hey, maybe the social environments suck so much people get brain damaged.
Yeah. It's like trying to talk with IQ sometimes with people. It's like you're mentioning the size of people's skulls. It's like these are not the same categories, like at all.
I mean, men's brains tend to be a little bigger than women's. Women's brains tend to have more connections between neurons. They tend to come out pretty close together. So it's not necessarily a matter of the brain size, it's a matter of brain size and connectivity. And the way the brain connectivity works is a heck of a lot more complicated.
I think the thing too is like there's no genuine interest on these things. Like someone who is standing by their position on that would listen to you saying that and be like, "Who cares? Bunch of mumbo jumbo." But it's like, but that's cool. that's a cool fact. It's a cool world we live in that we have all these differences and all these similarities and all these different things that we can measure and look at and learn from, but there's no curiosity on how the world actually operates, and that just stunts people.
I think a lot of people are also forgetting you need smart people to actually maintain a whole bunch of the systems we've got. You think the radar around an airport takes only needs dumb people to maintain it? Do you think the guy who designed the assembly line for cranking out cars is a dumb guy? You need to be able to identify smart people, foster their mechanical skills or other skills, so they can actually make the stuff that you want.
And it just goes to show how this just isn't true communism at the end of the day. Because, like, I was rereading the Communist Manifesto a little bit the other day, and it always makes me laugh when it says that essentially the party won't be separate from any other working class laborer. Like, all workers are going to be united in the same struggle. But then someone who's a cashier at Subway is going to be harping on about how retarded the local mechanic is, and it's like, way to build class growth there. You guys are really reading your manuals. This thing's only 40 pages.
I think that's why George Orwell's Animal Farm hit so hard. It was a reminder, yeah, it maybe work. It doesn't mean the people who do the work are the same afterwards.
It's people are different. Some people have better skills than others. Oftentimes, the people covered in oil and mud and shit are that I'm walking through when I see them in the gas station. They're wealthier than me. They have a better life than me. They have it more figured out than me. They're more educated than me. And it's not something to look down on. And simultaneously, these aren't the people you want to make enemies with.
I mean, one of the interesting ideas from Germany was the idea of PhD level trades. So, you know how people might get a 2-year degree for a trade, like 2-year degree to be a car mechanic?
Mhm.
Well, what about further education and credentials beyond that?
Makes sense. Probably have a hell of a lot more rocket engineers and cool shit if we did something like that.
Well, when people plowed money into education back in the 50s, they thought that included things like technical skills, what we would call trades. Because back then, I mean, being a scientist oftentimes meant assembling your own equipment. Knowing how to use a lathe was actually a useful skill for scientific research. Now, pretty much only tradesmen use it.
Jeez, and it's like they've taken all these skills out of society. Like, it still blew my mind whenever my old neighbor was talking to me, and she's just like, "Why don't you know how to work on your car? Didn't they teach you that when you got a driver's license?" And I'm like, what the hell? What?" And she's like, "Yeah, that's what we did whenever I got my car back in the day. They taught me how to fix my car. They taught me where all the parts were. They made sure that I could go through it on a quiz, and then we did the driver's test." I was like, well, for a guy who's stupid with cars like me, that'd have been nice to have.
And they've also been redesigning cars. So uh, a guy I knew was a mechanic. He was complaining about having to take off a rear wheel to handle a sensor that was dealing with something with the lights.
Yep. It's all digital. Like, we got all these chips and readers in my car that you need to go through. If we stop making payments on a car, these chips can turn your freaking car off. I had a friend who moved across the country about 3 weeks after getting a new car, and then they turned her car off and said, "You have like 30, 40 hours to drive back across the country and return it to us." It's just like, ugh. It's taking a, it just,
It's destroying your independence because you can't maintain it. If you don't buy it outright, you don't control it. A car used to be freedom. It's not, doesn't feel like freedom anymore.
yeah. Same thing could be said for like trying to find an apartment, all the hoops you gotta jump through just to get a fucking place to live. I'm surprised there's not more homeless people around here. The way it is. It's just getting a car is not as easy as getting a new car. Getting a new apartment's not as easy as getting a new apartment. Everything's got a middleman. Everything's just completely complicated. And meanwhile, you just have to sit and spiral and wait days, if not weeks, for someone else to get their shit together so you can get the things you need. Not a functional society. It's more functional here, to be sure. Way more functional, but a few pitfalls.
Well, there's room for improvement. Yeah. One thing I wanted to bring up. Have you heard of Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri?
No, I know you mentioned it before.
Have you heard of the Civilization series?
Yes.
Sid Meier's Civilization. Well, after Civilization 2, there was a whole bunch of corporate fraud, BS, incompetence at Microprose. So Sid Meier and some people left, and they founded Firaxis. And okay, we don't have the rights to Civilization, and we don't want to get in legal trouble. Let's imagine Civilization on a new planet. Sci-fi Civilization. So the game has a lot of quotes and philosophical ideas that I think you might find interesting.
I'll have to look into that. I also love that approach too. It reminds me of Zack Snyder. There's a space opera he did called Rebel Moon, and it was initially his script for Star Wars, but then they decided not to go with him for a Star Wars film. So he basically said, "Screw this! I'm going to go work with Netflix, and I'm going to make my own space opera, and we're just going to switch out the characters and the planet names and have the same story." I respect it when creators do that because yeah, that's one thing I've been like listening to a lot recently is about like comic book history and different writers and like people like Todd McFarlane and Stan Lee and all these people who put together these different worlds and just how they dealt with the bullshit, how some of them went to go on and make their own things, and you get a lot more creativity that way when you have less of that corporate overhang. I can imagine that something like Alpha Centauri's got more heart than Civilization given the distance from those types of elements.
Definitely had a lot of heart into it. Definitely had a heck of a lot more heart than Civilization 3.
I need to play those games. My husband played them a little bit and I watched, but I never actually played them.
I may be kind of biased, but I tend to prefer simple graphics and high complexity. So I actually like Civilization 2, some of the mods more than Civilization 3.
So what I'm hearing is this is a PC game to get.
I think you'll like it.
I'm gonna try it out. Like so I like the same thing too, like old like I don't know if it's DOS, but I like old DOS style games where there's more options where you really have to think and operate what you're doing. Like one I've been enjoying lately is I think it's Star Wars Rebellion.
Yep.
Yep. Have to mitigate all your planet's resources, the long travel times, the click a battle, look at a picture, then it's over. Like, I like that type of stuff a lot.
I tried playing it, but unfortunately, it just doesn't mesh well with my computer.
Yeah, I have problems from time to time too. I have a gaming computer. Sometimes these old games, for some reason, just don't click. But there's something a lot more charming, I feel like, to older graphics. Like I told you before we started talking on here, that my husband and I want to kind of put together a video game, and I've been doing a lot of like conceptual imagery for that and learning how to do pixel art and just like looking at old gameplay footage. Yesterday, I watched a bunch of test footage from like the reveal of the Nintendo 64 graphics, the reveal of the PS1 graphics, where they have the newscaster just sitting in awe over these simple little 3D neon polygons losing their shit, and like it's such an art. It's something I really want to learn more about as time goes on, especially with AI. I feel like I could have some extra assistance there if need be for the holes I don't know or understand.
One thing that I am rather frustrated with is that a lot of modern game companies seem to think that the story is there to serve the art rather than art is there to serve the story. Now, there's definitely cases where the art is kind of the point. Sometimes you just like to go into a world and just be awed by it, the visuals, but that gets boring after a while.
It really does.
So there's have you played Deus Ex?
A little bit, yeah. Just a
Okay.
little bit though.
Does the skyline become more ominous the further you get into the story?
I don't recall.
Okay. Okay. The Frogware game. My mind's blanking. It's you arrive at this island, investigating the disappearance of a guy's son.
Oh, was that the Lovecraft one?
Yeah.
The Sinking City? Yeah, yeah.
The Sinking City. Note how our graphics are not the most important part of it, but the graphics play a useful role in setting the mood. Could you maybe get that mood with poor graphics? Yeah, but it would be harder.
Yeah.
But you can also have high graphics bore fests like
I hate to say it, Skyrim was that for me. That was the big thing at the time, and like I enjoyed running around, but I felt like when I played Skyrim, it was more pretty than it was fun. For me at least.
okay.
A lot of people disagree with that assessment, but I just wasn't as captivated. I feel like Nintendo, they always had a genius approach, and this is why Nintendo games almost always pan out, is because they always start with the world. Before they even think of the story, they think of the world. And the way that I think was his name Miyamoto, the main Nintendo director, the way he described it was he took inspiration from miniature Japanese gardens. So he said every Nintendo game is basically a miniature garden. You know, you how they in Japan they'll have like there'll be like a bonsai and a bush, and sometimes there'll be like a little shrine and this and that. They basically build the world as a garden. And then they think, okay, what are the gameplay mechanics going to be for this? Once they establish that, how are the gameplay mechanics going to interact with this world? And then from there, they go to story and then graphics. You know, they have a process. They're like, we want to flesh this out before. That way we can make sure our story properly interacts with everything else and you can have like a more seamless experience. And it's kind of a process they take with them through most all of their games. And they're typically the ones that fare the best.
Well, when writing I mentioned it, BioShock, there we go. When writing BioShock, they started out with what is the philosophical idea? And then wrote the story and then did the gameplay. And then did the gameplay and then designed the levels. So they started with the abstract concept that helped them organize all the other ones. So there was at least something more than just run and gun violence. There was actually ideas there that could satisfy on a deeper level.
And they really did that too. Because like the story of Rapture, right? They're trying to escape America and communism and fascism and all the different countries, and they're like, you can just come here and create. You can do science to your heart's desire. You could do this, you can do that, and you don't have to worry about anything from the surface world because it's all underwater. Like that's a really good concept. BioShock got very philosophical with their stuff, and the art and the world design, it captures the mood so perfectly well.
And note the double meanings in "would you kindly."
What do you mean?
Well, wasn't that the control phrase used to force the player character to do something?
Oh yeah, I think you're right. I've gotten to the end of the game. I haven't beat the game. I beat Infinite though. Infinite was my BioShock. That was the one that got me on board the whole series, where I was just like, whoa.
But "would you kindly" is phrased as a polite request, but not a requirement. It preserves the illusion of voluntariness. But with that kind of control of someone previously, it indicates that it's not genuine free will, it's coercion disguised as free will.
More of a gun pointed to your head situation.
Yeah. So in a supposedly libertarian society, you can still have coercion so long as it's disguised as voluntary behavior. So much of the argument in BioShock was pointing out the potential flaws for libertarian societies. Hence the sequel.
I haven't played the sequel yet. 2's one I gotta touch.
The writers definitely tried to consider both sides of the argument.
These games are important, and it just sucks to watch so many of these games be destroyed, have their philosophical integrity just completely corrupted. And then for a guy like me who loves like conceptual art and lost media, you go back in a couple years later to figure out the story of what happened, and then you see like the first story is like always the best. It's always the most structured, the most grounded, the most deep, the one that's going to pack the biggest punch. And then you watch the different iterations over time, and it just becomes essentially sacrilege to the entire initial goal of what the project was to begin with. Like the Rey movie, they're planning out Star Wars episode 6. Try to figure out where they are. The new trilogy, basically. They're on the 6th writer for Rey, who I think might even be on his way out. They're doing the 7th, and they got to talk with the last writer. And they're like, yeah, basically what they've done is there was an initial story, and then all of the writers that came in before we got fired contributed to this story. They took the elements of what we wrote, stacked it on top of the initial story. So if this movie series ever comes out, which I pray to God that it doesn't, it's going to be an amalgamation of borderline nearly 10 different writers' visions crammed together by the corporation that is Disney and force-fed down people's throats.
That sounds like a disaster. But at the same time, I think George Lucas wishes he could have written Andor.
Yeah. Andor was talent. Because as good as George Lucas was, Andor kind of hit the notes that only some of the Star Wars authors could hit. It's everything it needs to be. Like, did you see they dropped a new trailer for season 2 yesterday or the day before, actually? Oh,
I did not notice that.
We're in a war. You want to fight? Or you want to win? Last night I dreamed that the world had turned around. All our hopes had come to be. The revolution starts now.
What a swell party this is.
here and you're ready to fight.
So what'd you think?
Well, it seems more violence heavy than season 1, which could be fitting because the universe seems to be getting more violent. Another thing might be that they had if they were funded, they probably had reliable funding for that season, so they had less pressure to get viewers. And it's generally believed that violent scenes in trailers get more viewers than quiet scenes, or at least people talking.
Yeah.
There was definitely violence in the first season. I think a little too much in the final episode, but you could probably put together a violent looking trailer for season 1. So that doesn't actually tell us the weight between the character and personality and the plotting and just the dumb actions. Well, you can have a smart action scene, but you don't know if it's going to be a smart action scene or a dumb action scene.
Yeah. And I'm hoping they take the George Lucas approach, because like some of those shots in there, I was just like, oh, that looks like Vietnam, or that looks like the Middle East. I'm hoping that they take that, how he did it, basically watching old war footage and then just putting a fucking TIE fighter over it instead of a Spitfire, and kind of doing it that traditional way and mimicking real world military conflict. I'm hoping we get some of that to where it's like, it makes sense the more you dissect it, it's not just a shoot 'em up.
That was it an X-wing attacking a ground vehicle?
Yeah.
That is kind of what I think they were doing.
Yeah. Oh wait, no, I think that one's like an experimental TIE fighter, which makes me kind of wonder because in the cartoons it's Thrawn who's coming up with like the experimental TIE fighters, and like the rebels are trying to figure out like I think it's the TIE Defender or the TIE Interceptor was actually something made by him. Like there's basically all these secret weapons
TIE
programs.
Interceptor.
Yeah.
I thought Darth Vader had a TIE Defender.
Maybe it wasn't a TIE Defender then, because I think you're right on that. Or no, he had a TIE Fighter Advanced. That's what that was. Yeah.
Okay.
This
I'm
fucking
sorry,
nerd
it's been
particulars.
years.
No, I'm having a refresh too. I'm like, wait a minute, which one was it? So I always beat myself up when I get Star Wars knowledge wrong. But I hope the politics are heavier, and I hope that it's not tainted by any of Disney's bullshit, because if they just gave me a couple episodes of Mon Mothma to begin with, I'd be fucking content. Like, that stuff's fun for me. I love the political side of Star Wars. That's always been the more fascinating angle. Like, the battles are cool, but like the cogs and how it all works, that's what's always gotten my imagination since I was a kid.
I'm a little optimistic because a bunch of the executives that were propping up the woke side of Star Wars got fired.
Yep.
And
Kathleen Kennedy's one of them.
She actually finally got fired.
As of a day or two ago, they're not announcing that she got fired, but it's heavily implied that she's got fired. And Star Wars Celebration is next month, so the thought is that they are announcing this, making it seem like she's stepping down for early retirement, and they're going to try to have a kiss-ass fest. And what's really going to happen is everybody's going to cheer for her exiting out and booing her. So they're trying to soften it, like, oh, she didn't fuck everything up. This is good old Kathleen. We love her. She'll be gone in December, though.
I hope that's right, but there were at least 2 other incidents in which there was strong evidence that she had been fired.
Yeah, this one, I didn't start taking the claims for real until the YouTube videos literally started saying, like, no, for real this time, it's actually happening. Like, all the videos were like, no, really. And the more I listened, I'm like, it might actually be over this time.
I'll believe it when I see it.
I know it. I know it. I'm trying to be optimistic, but this.
But there is another reason for optimism. Some of the writers and managers for Andor got promoted to other positions within Lucasfilm.
Mm.
So someone recognized the quality of Andor and wanted more of it.
Well, that's good. Like, I'm hoping Star Wars makes a comeback. I was hoping
How-
Skeleton Crew would be that, but
However, the thing is, when you promote people, you create kind of a void. So, did the people uh, who are filling in on Andor now have the experience to do the similar quality of work?
ooh,
That's what I'm wondering about.
I didn't even think of that. It's kind of like Mandalorian. The more you go on through the episodes, you're like, oh, there's a change here. Like, I liked Mandalorian, but there's some moments where I'm like, okay, let's get to the point.
Apparently, most of the changes in The Mandalorian were uh, efforts at sabotaging the project by various Lucasfilm factions. And
Oh,
Kathleen Kennedy's faction was really big in that.
I mean, you have a masculine figure. Guns are his religion. He's coming in. He's saving the day. The masked hero, knight in shining armor. That's everything she hates.
The freaking flying Vespas.
There's some choices. Lizzo. Lizzo's in. That was one of my favorite episodes, but I'm still always just like, God damn it, why'd it have to be Lizzo? Or Jack Black. Except Jack Black, I feel like makes a little more sense because he's a geeky guy. He's nerdy. He likes his video games and his movies. He's always been openly geeky. But it's like you also know they're there for an agenda because what was he saying at the same time? The same shit she was. Fuck Trump. We need equality. Na 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 na. And then they're just getting thrown into every movie in the meantime, and it's like, okay, I know what this is. It's gonna be a fun era to look back on. I'm excited to look back on Star Wars in 30 years and to be like, tell my grandkids, yeah, that shit actually happened.
So much potential. But the good news is we can look back on this, hopefully if it's finally over, uh, and have so much rich material to write about.
So much. Like that's the one cultural shift I'm waiting for that I think starting to happening is finally starting to get a point in culture where we can go back and analyze the last 10, 15 years a little bit more collectively than before. And I think that's where a lot of really cool things are going to come out of. Good ideas, rewrites, redos, like there's going to be a lot of opportunity for building and fixing things and making things better, realizing that a lot of what we've been getting is dog shit and trying to make something better.
On a tangential note, what do you think of Lindy Kaling's Scooby-Doo series?
Is that the one where they made Velma a black lesbian?
Yeah.
I watched like 5 minutes of it and I had to turn it off. It was so bad. Like, how can you get Scooby Doo so wrong?
And that's one of the things I find interesting. The original Scooby-Doo was kids from different backgrounds filling the major different social roles of jock, nerd, preppy, uh, stoner, all get working together, making society better by catching crooks, and making things better by being rational. And it was supposed to be everybody having fun, and it was yay. And there was the occasional special episode of here is this group from. Did they have the Harlem Globetrotters? I don't remember.
Yeah, they did that. They had, I think, one with Fat Albert, Batman. I think it was Adam West Batman came in cartoon form at one point. Like, you could get creative with Scooby Doo or like the live action movies, how different those were from the original material, but it was still enjoyable.
Uh,
Like,
And by going to exotic locales, meeting people like the Harlem Globetrotters, the point was to kind of teach kids that everybody was fundamentally, most people just wanted to live a quiet life, work together, uh, have a good time, and that generally being tolerant and nice to each other was a good thing. There were crooks, there were criminals, and you should be skeptical, but that overall you shouldn't. You could get along with pretty much everyone. Minnie Kaling Scooby Doo just seems hateful.
It really is. It's like these like franchises were taken over by people in the modern era who never learned the lessons to begin with. It's like all these people, for example, who scream about JFK being the most evil woman on the planet and we need her arrested and behead the witch and all this crazy shit, who will simultaneously tell you they were the biggest Harry Potter fans of all time. And it's like, were you? Or were you reading it just to get through it? You know, you clearly didn't understand the heart and soul of where this project was coming from. Who are you to come in and try to dictate any of that? Like, if you're cynical going into a project like Zoe Zegler, the girl who did Snow White, who are you to do Snow White if every PR opportunity you have, you say, fuck Snow White, it's outdated, I don't even like the ride at Disneyland, it's a horrible story, if I could get away with doing away with it, I would. Like, these are the types of people we're putting into these positions. Like, we're gonna come in and make it better, but it's like, but you fucking hate it. You hate the source material that you're working with. So all you're gonna pump into that is your own hateful views.
And that's what kind of astonishes me with the media over the past 6 or so years. How could anybody think that that would produce reliably watchable media?
I think they thought people were more propagandized than they were. I think all the shady cabal figures in power were like, "Hey, we're way ahead of schedule here. Let's just go all out. Let's just pray for the best and see what happens." And these people are fucking idiots.
I mean that's a. I mean, a couple screenwriters suggested that hey, a lot of these people are actually nepotism hires.
Mhm.
It's not just about ideology, it's about these are the talentless children of the elite who want a cushy job and prestige. But they don't actually know how to write or know how to think about the world, so they suck at writing.
Yeah. And it's all good. You need life experience to write. Like, ever since moving back, I'm gonna start going back to an old spot that I used to just go sit by the pond and like I used to go and sit there before I moved to Oregon with an empty notebook and I would just leave with it still being empty. I had like all the writer's block on the planet. I had nothing that I felt like I could put down to paper that meant anything. But now that I've gone out and lived life a little bit and I've come back, it's like, okay, now I have something to present. Now I have something to write. You can't have these stories being told by hollow people that have never lived to any degree other than going to a mall or sitting on their ass ordering food from an iPhone because they have all the money in the planet to never leave home. That's not how you get good storytelling.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with you, but I'd like to present an interesting counter argument.
Okay.
H.P. Lovecraft wrote a lot of interesting stories, but he was scared to leave home.
He had a properly placed sense of nihilism, though. These kids aren't actually depressed. They need depression in order to get that shit flourishing. They need to hate everybody with a fiber of their being. They need to go and marry a demographic that they fucking hate, and they need to live in it. But no, it's a fair point. It's just there's got to be because at least then he was getting culture, right? Like he had his father's grandfather's library. He had all of the research in the world, and you have so many of these younger generation thinking, "Oh, well, I get it through TikTok. I learn a million things a day." And it's like, okay, but did you actually deep dive these subjects? Did you actually retain any of what you heard, or did you forget it because the puppy farted in the next video? Like, it's not really a sustainable form of education. Like, we got to go back to books, paper, pencils, the
Yeah.
classics.
Uh, I can't express the rage when I was talking about the war in Gaza with a woman who had a security studies degree, and I could tell she was just taking a bunch of watching either YouTube or TikTok or something, and taking these videos at face value, uh, and being horrified by it, rather than what I consider to be responsible of, okay, there's footage, you don't know where it came from. Did it come from Gaza? Did it come from Syria? Did it come from Ukraine? And then wait until you have confirmation that you know exactly where the footage came from.
That's a hard thing with military footage too. If you're trying to dig that up, they'll tell you that something happened like 2 days ago, and then you look back and it actually happened in 2016. But it'll get you worked up like it just fucking happened.
Oh, Hamas blew up an Israeli tank that looked suspiciously like a T-74. Sorry, a T-72. Ukraine war footage was being recycled by people claiming that it was in Gaza. And if anyone who knows anything about tanks could see, hey, that's not an Israeli tank.
God. Everyone wants to be an armchair general. I'm guilty of it too. But it's just like
I mean, it's good that war is so terrible. Otherwise, we would do more of it. Because war is in many ways fun. There's a reason why people play strategy games. But at the same time, you end up with people in DC having a policy impact who have no freaking idea what the footage they're looking at is.
Yeah. It's just like, ugh. A lot of these people need to like actually go to these places. Or like people who are like putting in woke fucking propaganda and policy and all that shit. It's like, go spend some time in Portland. Not the good parts, not the outside parts. Go spend some time in Portland and then come back with your policy decision. Let's see how that works out. Like, let's say that after a man puts a machete to your throat that you want to institute this homeless policy. Like, ugh.
I think that's I think a lot of comfortable backgrounds tend to produce people who are optimistic and capable. But here's the thing, you don't always get that.
Taking pictures of me, Cyprian?
No, sorry, someone was calling me and then I fumbled with the phone and
you're good.
You end up, people from a stable, happy, safe background tend to be more productive, but they are also less familiar with how things can go wrong. So they don't do the full risk assessment. I think people need to experience failure in order to do that risk assessment, to really understand why that risk assessment is done, so they can actually do things reliably. But American society is very focused on optimism, because optimism can push people to do great things. What did he send? Sorry.
No, you're good.
I thought that was okay. That's tomorrow, I think. Sorry, I've got a meeting tomorrow.
Oh, you're good.
That but so in the military, in the Navy, you want your tactical officers to be optimists. They will try to push the weapon system as far as it can go. You want your engineers to be pessimists because there are a million ways things can go wrong and kill people. So you want them to work very hard to make sure these things are absolutely reliable. What happens if your engineer is an optimist and your weapons officer is a pessimist?
Shit's gonna get bungled.
Yep.
And I kind of feel that it's like there's a time and a place to be optimistic for sure. But I mean, if you look at this channel, this is all a product of nihilism and cynicism and skepticism. That could be a good driver too. Like, the rose-colored glasses aren't always a good thing. And sometimes you can get horrified into doing more if you see more.
And I think the past 10 years have kind of shown us situations in which optimism actually has catastrophic effects and pessimism has very beneficial effects. Optimism about harm reduction programs has probably trapped at least tens of thousands of people in homelessness, addiction, and if not killed them outright, at least made their lives much worse.
Yeah.
Pessimism about the reliability of people to stay professional probably helped protect people from getting harassed and relying too heavily on bureaucracies that got corrupted. Pessimism, were the pessimists or the optimists right about gender affirming care?
Oh, pessimists. It's all a balancing act. That's kind of like why when you were describing earlier about how the two-party system actually having benefits, like I could see in the last couple months especially that there's a beneficial aspect to it, and that it's all a balancing act because optimism and pessimism are two different ends of the spectrum and they need to balance each other out. It can't just be one over the other, otherwise things become too critical and chaotic. But when you have that proper sense of balance, then shit tends to get done a little bit more. And I'd agree at different times, like implementing more pessimism, more cynicism, more questioning. This is definitely the time for that, more than ever.
So here's I know this is kind of a change of topic, but imagine a sci-fi world, kind of like in Andor, but you have a bunch of rebels who are toying between optimistic about sparking the revolution versus a pessimist of, okay, if we rebel now, we're all gonna die. How do we do this? And which faction wins? Which approach wins? And you don't even need to dig too hard because that was what the IRA was facing back in 1917. Did they go with the Easter Rising or, hold back and do something else?
Yeah. It's pessimism wins wars.
Sometimes.
Well, again, balance, but it's like when the whole time you're describing that, I'm thinking of that one character, Luthen or whatever, in his monologue about how giving up everything and living in the shadows. And I feel like his character is like an example of how that thinking can like push you off the edge.
And what do you sacrifice?
Calm. Kindness, kinship. Love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago from which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, they set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, There's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything!
But simultaneously, I'm like kind of looking at that. I'm like, that's a more realistic take on revolution than, I don't shouldn't say it's to be idealized. It's just, again, this world, these things are just so much darker than people give credit for. And it's people fighting a moral conflict within themselves over which side, which direction to lean towards. Do you want to be more hard-hearted, or do you want to be more friendly and soft in your approach? Which, I don't know, I think I've kind of struggled with that on the channel too. Do I want to do something light and fluffy today, or do I want to horrify these motherfuckers and get them onto this level? What do we do? What do we do? And there's just like a constant struggle of dark and light.
And life is both of them. Because if you keep on being too harsh, you actually create the situations in which a harsh response is the only rational response. A lighter hand sometimes provides better information and allows a less harsh response. So, I would be very curious to see what kind of science fiction stories you write.
Well, so far it's getting fucking weird. But I'm gonna send you some stuff after this, because man, I've been working on this game story, which it's gonna go in turn with my comic book story. I've been formulating what I want to do for my High Republic story, which I guess I can tell you a little bit of that one, what I decided to do with the High Republic. I decided to do a short, and one of the biggest criticisms about the book is like the main antagonist are the Nile. They're this cult raider group of these like punk music blasting like raiders that come in and they gas everybody out and they steal and they plunder and they do all these horrible things. But there's never an explanation as to why. Ever. I've like looked through like spoiler reviews for future books I have to read, and everyone who's read these books, they're like, there's no context for why these Nile do what they do. There's no ideological motivation. There's no philosophical motivation. And I'm just kind of looking at like how people are like talking about the Nile, and I'm like, they're talking about the Nile just like they were in they talk about fucking Antifa. Like, who are these people? Why are they doing this? This makes no sense. They just want to dress colorfully and cause havoc. There's no real motivational structure here. And I kind of feel like with the things that I've dissected in my own life story and different people I know, I feel like it'd be fun to write a story from a perspective of a Nile Raider who kind of gets into it for the same reasons I got into Antifa, kind of like the galaxy's changing, so therefore something needs to be done, but becoming disillusioned with them over time after realizing that they're not as educated on these matters as she is, that they don't really have an idea of what's happening. And this character kind of trying to piece why they operate the way they do and kind of how they're being corrupted from the top to just give into drugs and sex and debauchery and all this crazy stuff. But how the High Republic and modern Star Wars, like how in the Acolyte they'll have Jordan Peterson quotes by the villain, or they'll slam all these historical figures, and they try to like make Yoda the bad guy and all this crazy stuff. And I'm just kind of thinking, well, what if this character is raiding something one day and finds a little like a recording of Yoda teaching some younglings, kind of being that like fatherly inspiration that this character didn't have. And maybe Yoda's saying some quotes that are along the lines of like Gad Sad or Jordan Peterson or all these people that they've wanted to demonize. And what if the Jedi are kind of, in a way of mimicking our own reality, kind of like imparting these lessons, and this character sees that these lessons are being imparted and ultimately kind of comes to the realization, what am I fighting against? These people aren't listening to me. I tried to tell them the Jedi are good. I tried to tell them this. I tried to do this. They've shunned me, they've stalked me, they've done all this crazy stuff under the sun, and just kind of like a walk away story through that perspective.
Okay. That definitely has possibility. Because by the nature of the world and by the nature of the basic outline of the characters, you've got so many hooks for various things that could be brought in.
And a lot of the downside too of like toxic positivity, you know, you have the Republic screaming, "We are the Republic for light and life." But meanwhile, all these worlds are getting destroyed. So maybe also this character kind of like having that dualistic perspective of like, okay, I'm not disillusioned to the atrocities that are happening here, but I want to kind of come in and make them better in a sense, and kind of just highlighting a lot of this neo-Marxist culture that we're dealing with in the modern day society, implementing it there. Yeah, I just think there's a lot of stuff to work with in the real world because they really try to woke out Star Wars, and it's like you kind of wrote in your own demise.
If the Republic was so great, why would people be choosing the Empire? The Republic is isn't just an ideal. Something's happening, and I don't know what. Lots of emergency vehicles going along. The Republic is a government, and governments are necessarily subject to corruption and disputes. And the Empire would not have emerged, would not have had true believers like the IOC if there hadn't been some problems with the Republic.
Yeah.
And wasn't there slavery in the Republic? And the Jedi didn't feel like it was something that they could effectively deal with. And there was slavery years later, after the Jedi definitely knew about it.
And they sent Anakin to the slave planet thinking that was a great idea.
So there's definitely some flaws with the Republic. Maybe toxic positivity prevented them from acknowledging their flaws. So people just splinter off, either join the Empire or join other groups.
And then I feel like Andor did this perfectly, or maybe no, it was the Mandalorian season 3 when they have the Imperial defector, the cloning officer. He comes into Coruscant and he's just talking with all these like rich people in the capital, and they're talking, and one guy is just like, "Oh yeah, I've been working with the Republic for years," and his wife's just like, "It's not the Republic anymore, sweetie. It's the Empire." And he's just like, "Ah, Empire, Republic. I just can't keep up. I go with the flow." Like that little scene hit hard where I was just like, "Ooh, yeah, that would certainly be a problem too."
Well, I've talked to former government employees, and they just can't seem to understand the way the mindset of the bureaucracy changed over the past decade. It I get advice for how things work that stopped being applicable 20 years ago. And that's just one of those constant problems. Stalin didn't seem to recognize that, oh, when he sent people to Siberia, it wasn't as nice as when he went there.
Disconnect and disillusionment.
Yeah.
Yep. There's a negative aspects in society, but I do feel like they're changing. Just man, I'd say slower than I would like. It feels like it's changing fast. I don't know if it's quick or slow.
The psychological changes are very fast right now, but the institutional changes are still fairly slow.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a concerted counterattack from the Obama faction trying to push a bunch of bills. But maybe that's just me seeing a pattern in random noise. but it really does feel like the main forces behind wokeness and censorship and harassment have ebbed. They're still there, but they're not as coercive, they're not as powerful. There's a lot less signs of true belief. I think the worst of it is past. There's still definitely going to be wokeness. There's still definitely going to be ideological harassment. There's still going to be patronage networks built on corruption. But it does look like the worst of it is over.
Now I just hope that in my lifetime I don't see a resurgence. That's one thing I get worried about is 56 years down the line. I'm 70, 60 years old. I have shit to take care of. Maybe I'm fucking in debt or maybe I'm on the verge of retirement and then all of a sudden it's just back.
There's people who survived torture in communist prisons still alive, who haven't even made it to retirement age. And there's a resurgence of communist ideology. It's gonna come back.
Yeah. I just think we just need to fortify ourselves for when it does. Like, we need to be like Louisianans. 'Cause again, time I went to Louisiana, everything was battered, destroyed, looked like a Dr. Seuss painting. Everything was twisted and gnarled and uprooted. The roads were completely devastated. Nicest fucking people you'll ever meet on the face of this fucking planet. And when you ask them why, it's because they say we deal with so much bullshit on a regular basis. We had a hurricane this year. We're going to have one next year. We don't have time to butt heads. There's still assholes there to be sure, but for the most part, it's just like, tragedy's going to come and go. We're built for it. It's made us stronger. We're going to pick up our heads and persevere.
And I think one of the things that caught people by surprise with this round of totalitarian temptation was not just weaponization of kindness, but the mental desperation to believe in the totalitarian ideal by broken people. How do you deal with a broken person who is clinging to some ideal of themselves as a good person as a way to hold on? People weren't prepared for that.
It's time we get prepared. So being around my little sister and stuff, it's, she's heard whispers of me talking about certain things. And I've just told her, I'm like, when you get older, the world's going to be a weird place. I got this podcast waiting for you here. I want you to come in and learn some lessons of things that were happening right now. But for now, I just want you to be a kid. Just be a kid. I've told her that's the biggest problem with why the adults are fighting right now is because kids couldn't be kids. You need to go play. You need to have some fun. And I'll teach her some little historical lessons along the way. We're still learning about government corruption along the way, but not in a way that's like waterboarding, in a way that's just like this kid's gonna grow up and this kid's gonna fucking kick this world's fucking ass because she's gonna know what the hell is happening. Like, we got to get back to fostering this next generation because at the end of the day, they were the targets. They're always the targets. The next generation after them will be the targets, and then after them and after them. And once we realize that that's where the chain is and that's what we need to fortify, I think we'll be good.
The battle for civilization is fought every generation.
And it's not the funnest thing to have these conversations and do these types of things, but at least it's something to do.
Yep.
Well, man, I think I got to take off to work here soon. Is there any closing thoughts you might have?
No, that's the biggest stuff. It's good talking to you again. I look forward to your writing.
Thanks.
And try Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri, okay?
I will. Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, man.
Good day.
You have a good day. Peace and love.
They told me, be a man, boy, toughen up. Then they let women become men, they tricked me. They told me, speak your mind if you're brave enough. And I spoke up and I got canceled quickly. We were always too young and too nice, and now we're too old and too white. You're either too left or too right. Well, we're speaking our minds tonight. 'Cause you can't cancel all of us, and you're more than welcome to try. But you can't cancel all of us, 'cause we're standing here side by side. And you can't cancel all of us, we'll burn the stars and the stripes. But you can't cancel all of us, 'cause the internet ain't real life. They told me, be a man, boy, just like your dad. They told me everything I am is toxic. They said the color of your skin doesn't make you bad, but mine makes me racist, got it. We were always too weak and too afraid, and now we're too male and too straight. You're either too real or too fake. Well, we're speaking our minds today. 'Cause you can't cancel all of us, and you're more than welcome to try. But you can't cancel all of us, 'cause we're standing here side by side. And you can't cancel all of us, we'll burn the stars and the stripes. But you can't cancel all of us, 'cause the internet ain't real life. You can take my job away for something I may have said online, but you can't control a man who won't comply. And you can call me every name that you might think will hurt my pride, but if you think you're stopping me, you're out your mind. 'Cause you can't cancel all of us, and you're more than welcome to try. But you can't cancel all of us, 'cause we're standing here side by side. And you can't cancel all of us, we'll burn the stars and the stripes. But you can't cancel all of us, 'cause the internet ain't real life. 'Cause you can't cancel all of us, and you're more than welcome to try. But you can't cancel all of us, 'cause we're standing here side by side.